Hey guys, welcome back to another art video. In this video, I'll be doing another oil pastel portrait. This is one of my coworkers that had her birthday coming up soon, so I offered to do a portrait for her. And honestly, I can never get sick of using oil pastels. They're so addicting. Every time I finish a painting in oil pastel, when I wake up the next morning, I want to start using them again. I really crave the satisfaction of using them. So I'm always looking for excuses of how I can use my oil pastels. Anyway, for the materials of this specific painting, I'm using my standard Cray Expressionist oil pastel sets, along with my Rowney Simply Oil Pastels on Royal Langnickel oil paper. Some people have been asking me if the Rowney Simply Oil Pastels are a decent pastel, and they are decent for waxy pastels, although you do have to be careful because these cheaper oil pastels, the lighter colors barely even show any pigment, and they're like really hard, and it's just really hard to layer with them. So it's fine for a waxy pastel and it's fine for experimenting, but for doing like completed illustrations in them, it's kind of hard. You do have to mix them up with other oil pastels. So I was doing the same technique that I used for my older oil pastel paintings, which is use the harder oil pastels first and then overlay them with the creamier Cray. And I was trying out something a little different in this portrait where I was focusing a whole lot more on color rather than getting accurate skin tones. And I think I did go a little overboard because when I was nearly done with the portrait, she was looking a little too colorful and abstract. And I do like abstract look in a certain sense. I don't like making a portrait look photorealistic because I think that's kind of boring. You can see photorealism in real life, so when you're doing a painting or working on an artwork, why try and make something look like you can see it in reality when you can make it look even better? So I do like abstraction to a certain point, but this was looking a little too abstract, and even my mom saw it and she said please tone it down because it was looking too crazy. So I toned it down by adding some skin tones on top of the colors, and it's not like I was losing all the color that I underlaid, because when you're using waxier oil pastels, then the pastels aren't that opaque, so the underlaying colors can still show through the overlaying one. They're all like translucent, so you can see a little bit of color in each like layer, which I really like. That's not the case with the oily oil pastels because they're a whole lot more opaque, so even if you do a lot of underlaying layers, if you overlay a new layer, you're most likely going to lose a lot of color from those underlaying layers. And I'll explain this a whole lot more in detail when I make my oil pastel tutorial video. I'm still thinking of how I'm going to make it. Like, I'm going to have to make up a whole bunch of terms because I have been researching oil pastel terms, but I couldn't really find anything online, so I'm just going to make them up for myself. Hopefully they'll be understandable to you guys. And I did notice a big difference between the older and the newer Cray in this specific painting. I mentioned in my comparison video when I was comparing the old and the new full sets of the Cray Expressionist that the older ones felt really chalky in comparison to the newer ones. And that does affect how it layers on certain papers. In this portrait, I was having a harder time overlaying the older ones rather than the newer ones. It seemed like the older ones were doing that sgraffito effect again, where it was scratching off all the layers of the colors. So, and there was still no pigment that was coming out of it. So I mostly stuck with using the newer Cray. But that was only on this paper, because in my previous video, I was actually trying out oil pastels on cold pressed watercolor paper, mostly because I was shopping for Sennelier oil pastel paper, but the price range is really ridiculous. It ranges from like $60 to $80 for one paper pad that only has like 15 sheets in it. So it's really, really out of my budget. But I was reading a lot of reviews online, and some people were saying that the texture of the Sennelier oil pastel paper resembles the texture of cold pressed watercolor paper, and I was thinking, oh, I have plenty of that, so why not just try that out for one of my paintings? So I tried it out. The results were very satisfactory. The oil pastels layered and blended really well, and it seemed like the old and the new Cray didn't have that much difference. Like, they performed really similarly on that paper because cold pressed watercolor paper has a lot of texture, so it was able to grab at the pastel really well. But this Royal Langnickel oil color paper is much smoother, so it couldn't handle that many layers without the sgraffito effect happening, so I was trying to avoid that the best I could. But Royal Langnickel actually changed how they make their oil color paper. Now it looks a whole lot more like a canvas, like it has a really gritty texture, so it can handle a whole lot more pastel layers. So I just ordered a bunch more, and I'm going to start using that paper instead. Lastly, for the background, I was a little stumped. Like, I didn't know what would be the perfect background for this specific portrait, so I was just Googling portrait backgrounds, and I believe this is called stop motion background, where there's a background but it's really out of focus to the point where all the lights in the background start looking like circles. So I found one background that I really liked and sort of resembled a happy birthday kind of theme, and I attempted to do it in oil pastel, although I was really intimidated when I first layered on that black color. Usually if you layer on like one of the dominating colors like black or dark blue or dark green, like a really dark color, it's really hard to overlay light colors on it and start bringing back like brightness in dark colors. And it's also really hard to remove oil pastel because oil pastel is a whole lot more permanent than soft pastels. That's something I really like about it, but it can also play into your downfall if you put in a wrong color and you try to remove it, because it'll most likely stain the paper. But in the end, I think the results look quite decent anyway. I'm trying out something new in all my oil pastel portraits. The first one with Tracy, I was experimenting with lighter backgrounds, and the second one with the watercolor paper, I was experimenting with metallics in the background. I sort of made like a metallic rose. It was kind of hard to see. It didn't turn up like how I expected, but the marks on the paper sort of suggest like an abstract rose, so I still think it looks quite decent. And in my next piece, I did attempt to use glitter in my oil pastel background. I used a Wink of Stella pen. Unfortunately, the Wink of Stella pen picked up some of the oil pastel pigment, because some oil pastels can be reactivated if you put like a certain media on top of it, and then it'll start working like watercolor. So I was kind of afraid that the liquid in Wink of Stella pen would activate the oil pastels, but I was kind of in a hurry. Unfortunately, I didn't end up recording the speed paint for that specific portrait. I could probably drop in a thumbnail somewhere in this video, but I was really rushing because the girl was leaving in a few days, so I wanted it to be ready for her. Instead of experimenting to see if the Wink of Stella pen can overlay without activating the pigment, I just quickly used it. And yeah, it did end up staining the Wink of Stella pen, so I'm not going to use Wink of Stella on any more of my oil pastel paintings, but I did think it was a fun experiment to try out. So that's all I really have to say about this painting. I really enjoyed making it. Unfortunately, I wasn't there when she first received this painting because our schedules weren't coinciding, so I just left it in the office for her, but apparently all my coworkers are saying that she showed it to everybody. She loved it so much, so I'm still glad that she liked it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.